things, you know, done, the adult, doing our daily tasks, doing what we need to do. But where's our child? Yes, please, sir.
How do you become a child when you don't feel that?
Okay. How do you become a child when you just don't feel that way?
Yeah, you don't feel good.
All right. A good place to start is to be looking at what have you done in the past? Where was your child in the past? Okay. Almost all of us had a pretty strong child as kids. Okay. What did you enjoy doing? You know. Now, can you still do it? Okay. If you really loved going out on a court someplace and shooting hoops, and you can't do that anymore, then your challenge becomes, okay, where do I find the joy again, given my reality? Okay, and sometimes that's a matter of talking to your wife, to your kids, saying, hey, I'm looking for my kid in me. What do you suggest? You know? And it could be, taking a class of humor. It could be going to movies that are funny. It could be anything. I'm not knowing you, it's hard for me to even suggest. But what you need to do is look at yourself and say, okay, what would really give me some joy? What would give me laughter? What would give me humor again in my life? Okay? And sometimes it takes a little while. It takes talking to people. Say, what do you think? What do you think? Okay. And yeah, does that make sense at all? Yeah. And sometimes it's just a challenge that you've got to figure out for yourself, because everybody's different. So, yeah.
Like I say, it's when you feel good, then you can do that stuff.
Okay.
When you don't feel good, you don't do that stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, he still manages to work. He just doesn't play like he used
Ah.
to. But he still manages to work.
So what that tells me right away, see, that's an important insight. So what it tells me is if you're motivated to do something, and there's something about work, you like to be productive, or you like to feel you're accomplishing things, or there's a joy in the work that you do. So that's important to know. So when you want to, you can do activity, but now what are you going to do to have some fun? Okay? And that's different for everybody. So that's your challenge. Okay? You go do it. You go do it. Whatever it may be, you find it. You find it. Okay? Which brings us to what you all have already brought up, and which is critically important. Critically important. Seeking out enjoyment in life, even when hurting. Finding the humor in situations, making ourselves laugh. Okay? Now, I talk a lot about humor and laughter in my work that I do with my patients. Some patients, when they're brand new to it, will say there's nothing funny about blindness. There's nothing funny about it. And probably some of you all may be thinking, well, there's nothing funny about what I'm living right now. Okay? But what I would suggest to you is that you can find humor in just about everything. Okay? With my patients, one of the things, because I do a lot of therapy with them and all, what I'm always watching for is their sense of humor. Because I know when I see that laughter, when I see that humor coming out, I know that they're moving along that road of adjustment. That's huge for me. I watch for it all the time. That's huge. And I'll tell you some of the stories. I love it when my patients, and they do this all the time, they'll come in and say, well, Julia, you'll never guess what happened this time. And I know I'm in for a great story. So one of my patients a couple of months ago, she had, over the holidays, she had volunteered to make the family pies for the family gathering. And she had a pretty big family, so this was about 8 or 10 pies that she was going to have to make. So she decided to cheat, which I do all the time when I'm making pies, and to use a pre-made crust. I think that's smart, actually, but anyway. So she had all these pre-made crusts lined up, but with her vision impairment, she forgot that, and she couldn't see that piece of clear plastic.
Oh.
Goes over the crust.
Oh, no.
Yeah. She poured the fillings right in on that plastic and baked the pies like that. Her family laughed. She laughed. They thought that was the funniest thing. It's going to be a beautiful story to go down, in the family. Everybody, when Grandma did such and such. It was just, so they laugh. I had another patient who was, happened a few years ago when ZCMI was still ZCMI. And she had gone over to ZCMI with a friend just to do a little shopping. And so they were looking around at various things in one of the departments, and they kind of separated a little bit. And my patient realized what time it was getting to be. So she went back to the friend and said, well, shall we go home now? And then realized she was talking to some strange man who was wearing kind of the same colors as her friend. So she was inviting some guy to go home with her. You know? She thought that was the funniest thing. Just laughing. Yeah, just laughing, you know. Just being able to laugh about these things as much as possible, finding the humor. I recommend funny movies. I recommend, just videos that are funny. My husband and I have collections of the British comedies. We love British comedy. It's just hilarious. We have Frasier. We have a whole thing of Frasier. We have all these different comedies, and we'll just sit there and just laugh sometimes. And sometimes my husband or I will say, I need a funny one tonight, and we turn it on. Okay, and you find your stress level going down. You're laughing. They've actually come up with some research that suggests that biochemically, when we laugh, we're dissipating the stress hormones. I mean, it's actually biochemically good for us to laugh. Okay? All right, learning to be flexible. Okay, I really think that that's one of the most important characteristics that anybody can have, because as we've already talked about, life is just gets crazy sometimes. To be able to bend with the wind, to be able to shrug your shoulders and say, oh well. There's a country and western song, I can't remember who sang it, about a tree in the backyard, and that it bent with the wind and it survived. It's an important, it's a nice metaphor, and it's just so important. Don't you all think? I think that's, the flexibility part of it, very, very important. Reframing, making yourself see the glass half full rather than half empty. Yes, please.
One thing my husband and I have learned to do is when things get kind of weird, we just say, what is. And I sometimes say it to him, and he sometimes says it
Beautiful.
to me. But it is.
Yeah.
What is.
That's right. That's right. That's just so true. And sometimes just saying that, makes it true. Makes it true. Que sera, sera.
Right.
That's right. This is getting a little awkward, isn't it, back and forth. For a lot of people, nurturing a belief in God or a belief system outside of self. If you're not a religious person, that's okay. But to find a belief outside of yourself, something else beyond, whether it's our country, our belief in our country, whatever, belief in the dignity and worth of human life, or respect for nature, the earth, and its creatures. What happens sometimes when we're dealing with life and it's gotten kind of tough is we tend to become egocentric. It means that we turn inward. Okay? We become kind of consumed with me. And that's just not healthy. It doesn't serve us well. If we can learn to look outside of self and appreciate it, respect it, and enjoy it, it can help incredibly. Finding, and this one is kind of interesting, and it's kind of hard to perceive and accept sometimes, but finding meaning in misfortune or difficulties. And it is there. Finding meaning. A beautiful example of that. How many of you all have read Tuesdays with Morrie? A great book. Tuesdays with Morrie. What this is, it was written by Mitch Albom. Mitch Albom went to Brandeis University. One of his very favorite professors was Professor Morrie Schwartz there. And they got to know each other, a lot of respect for each other. Dr. Schwartz had his office hours on Tuesdays. And so this young undergraduate student would go to his professor's office every Tuesday, and they would just talk about life and goals and the meaning of life and all these various things. Well, Mitch graduated, Promise to stay in touch. I can tell you from experience, I'm a university professor. Your students promise they'll stay in touch. They don't. They go on to their lives, and that's okay. I mean, it's normal. Mitch Albom went back east and became a very famous sports writer. Okay? So one day Mitch was thumbing, just going through the channels, and came across somebody, I can't remember who it was, one of the big names in broadcasting. And he was interviewing his old professor. So of course he stopped right there to see what was going on. Well, it turned out that his professor had been diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And it's a terminal disease. But the reason the media had picked it up was the way that he was dealing with this. Okay? And so, of course, Mitch contacted his old professor, started flying back to Brandeis University every Tuesday, again, to meet with his old professor, until eventually his professor did die. This book is those Tuesdays that he would meet with his professor, and what he learned from the experience and all. And so when we talk about finding meaning in what is going on, okay, I think this is a good example. Maury's doctors guessed he had 2 years left. Maury knew it was less. But my old professor had made a profound decision. One, he began to construct the day he came out of the doctor's office with a sword hanging over his head. Do I wither up and disappear? Or do I make the best of my time left, he asked himself. He would not wither. He would not be ashamed of dying. Instead, he would make death his final project, the center point of his life. Since everyone was going to die, he could be a great value, right? He could be research, a human textbook. Study me in my slow and patient demise. Watch what happens to me. Learn with me. Maury would walk that final bridge between life and death and narrate the trip. Now you see, he was a professor. Those of us who teach love to teach. And what he decided was in his dying, he was going to be the teacher. Okay? And I'm just picking bits and pieces out here. He entertained a growing stream of visitors. He had discussion groups about dying, what it really meant, how societies had always been afraid of it without necessarily understanding it. He told his friends that if they really wanted to help him, they would treat him not with sympathy but with visits, phone calls, a sharing of their problems, the way they had always shared their problems because Maury had always been a wonderful listener. For all that was happening to him, his voice was strong and inviting. His mind was vibrating with a million thoughts. He was intent on proving that the word dying was not synonymous with useless. The new year came and went. Although he never said it to anyone, Maury knew this would be the last year of his life. He was using a wheelchair now, and he was fighting time to say all the things he wanted to say to all the people he loved. When a colleague at Brandeis died suddenly of a heart attack, Maury went to his funeral. He came home depressed. What a waste, he said. All those people saying all those wonderful things, and Irv never got to hear any of it. Maury had a better idea. He made some calls, chose a date, and on a cold Sunday afternoon, he was joined in his home by a small group of friends and family for a living funeral. Each of them spoke and paid tribute to my old professors. Some cried, some laughed. Maury cried and laughed with them, and all the heartfelt things we never get to say, those we love, Maury said that day. His living funeral was a rousing success, only Maury wasn't dead yet. In fact, the most unusual part of his life was about to unfold. There was the meaning for him. Okay? And it's different for everybody. It's different. Okay? But finding the meaning. When I'm working with my patients, and particularly with my older patients, and as we age, we're more at risk for blinding conditions. So a lot of my patients are in later years. And so often they'll say to me something like, I can't drive the grandchildren places anymore. What use am I? I'm of no use at all. And so I'll talk to them about finding their meaning. What is their meaning? And for a lot of them, what it is? It becomes passing on their stories. And giving advice to coming generations and their families. They start taping their thoughts, and it becomes sort of a cause for them. It's their meaning to pass on all the wisdom that they've learned, and to pass on the family stories, and so on. Okay, so that's just another example of finding the meaning in what's going on in your life.